1 year ago I made a video where I recreated an episode of the Great British Bake Off, and in that video I made from scratch, for the first time in my life, a loaf of bread, a pizza and some little Danish buns. I quite liked making that video and people seemed to enjoy it, so I thought it'd be funny to do it again, break out the yeast and recreate bread week from last week's episode of the new season of the Bake Off. Now, one of the bakes I did in this video did not turn out good, but two of them turned out very nice. I'm sure most of you know the 1966 Clint Eastwood classic, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. Well, today we're going to have The Good, the Bad and the Lovely, starring me as Clint Eastwood. So bake number one was a classic cottage loaf, and I've never seen one of these, I've never tasted one, and I've certainly never baked one before. I've actually not baked any bread since the previous video I made last year, so last October, when I made that loaf and the pizza and the buns for the very first time. I've not made bread since then, just because I'm lazy. I do like making bread, it is a very fun process, but just the laziness trumps all, and I will always just opt to go to the supermarket and buy a pre-sliced, pre-made loaf. Now, I decided to go again with bread week for recreating an episode of the Bake Off, and that was intentional because I felt like doing something like cake week or biscuit week, where you make a whole bunch of sugary things, would just be a bit exhausting in terms of having to eat all of that stuff. With bread, you don't really get sick of eating bread. Well, I don't. But when you eat too much sugar, or certainly when I eat too much sugar, my mouth feels all like furry. I've seen people describe it as it feels like you're wearing a bathrobe, a dressing gown in your mouth, and I can relate to that. So I thought it was better to make bread. Additionally, bread has the bonus of being good for freezing. When you try and freeze like cake, or I guess cookies aren't too bad, but cake, it kind of goes a bit sweaty. I don't know what it is about it, maybe it's the butter content inside the cake, but I don't seem to have the same problem with bread. So a lot of bonuses to doing bread week. Okay, I need to tip this out onto a floured surface and then fold it over. And I'm going to make this pesto flavoured. Green pesto flavoured, if that's a flavour. The recipe doesn't say to do this. This is just for a plain loaf, but I want to make it pesto flavoured. So what I'm going to do is flatten it out, fill it with as much pesto as I can, and then just fold it over and then fill it with more pesto and hope it turns out good. So after winning that little dispute with the pesto jar, it was kind of all slippy, I don't know why, I started adding it to my dough, and to be quite honest, to give you a bit of a spoiler, this was the bit where I messed up. This bake was the bad bake, in quotation marks. It didn't turn out too bad, but I was too overzealous with the pesto. I should have really just done one layer, and I shouldn't have even put on as much as I did, but I put on 2 layers, and you can tell when I kind of start like, I'm like fumbling my words just because I'm getting stressed out watching this. When I started like rolling it up and kind of smoothing it out, it was starting to split and just bulge. You do it in 2 parts. You put the big fat part on the bottom, then you put a little bit on top. It kind of looks like, is it Jabba the Hutt from Star Wars? Kind of looks like that guy. Or it looks like this enemy from Elden Ring, the big fat boy. I'll put some pictures on the screen so that you know what I'm talking about. But that's what I think it looks like. It doesn't look good. It should be much drier. I think a wet bread is just not the look. And I actually left out the most important and, to be quite frank, most horny stage of this bake, and that's when you're meant to kind of like finger a hole in the top. I just forgot to do that, and I'm kind of disappointed in myself because I think not only would it have looked better, it was also going to be quite funny because I was going to like blur my fingers, and me and you, we would have all had a big laugh. So I think that was why it sort of slipped off to the side. Saying that, it sounded good, it looked rustic, let's just call it rustic, and it tasted really good as well. This was like 11 o'clock at night by the time I finished, and I wasn't really hungry at all, but I gave it a little try and I was actually impressed with it. But overall, I think I can really only give it a 6 out of 10. So up next, bake number 2, Devonshire splits. And I'd never seen these before the episode last week, but they look class. Really nice little sort of patisserie things. And I actually quite like doing patisserie style bakes. I seem to surprise myself with how good they turn out, which I suppose is a little bit of a spoiler. But like in last year's episode that I recreated, I did the Danish swirls, and even though there was kind of a bit touch and go for a little while, I managed to save them, and I was actually pretty pleased with how they turned out. It kind of gave me a little bit of an ego boost, and again, a bit of a spoiler, I'm kind of pleased with how these turn out as well. I didn't really try them myself. I tried little bits here and there, but I can't eat like heavy dairy, and these have double cream in them. I never really realised until way too late in my life that I'm probably a bit lactose intolerant. Only with things like ice cream and double cream, heavy dairy seems to do me a mischief and just makes me feel just hellish. But because of that, I didn't want to try them myself. So instead of that, as a little extra for this video, I'll include my dad's review, because I basically just took them round to give to my parents and they tried them out instead. But as I was saying, I'm always pretty impressed with my abilities when it comes to doing patisserie style things. I think this is patisserie style, so who knows, in the future maybe there's space for me to open my own patisserie, which of course I would call the patisserie. With the dough formed and slapped a little bit, I like slapping the dough, I don't know why, it's just kind of satisfying. The next part was making the jam using real strawberries. I didn't have a masher. You were meant to use a potato masher to kind of mash this up. I just have a blender, so I whizzed up the strawberries, added them to the pan with some jam sugar, and then I boiled it. Unfortunately, I overboiled it. I've never made jam before, and it just didn't turn out well. I think I boiled it for too long, because after I poured it into this little bowl, put it to the side to let it cool down, and then put it in the fridge, when I took it out of the fridge 2 hours later, it was like frozen solid, or it like, I don't know, it just hardened up. It was like a boiled sweetie. It was like a strawberry Werther's original. Really not what you want from your jam. I did manage to save it, luckily. I just poured a little bit of boiling water over it and just kind of mixed it around with a teaspoon until it became kind of workable, like a regular jam. So luckily, I did manage to save it, and I think that just kind of lends to how successful the patisserie will be, because I can just kind of fight any patisserie challenge that comes my way. So after the jam was sorted, I cut up the dough into 8 little balls and set it aside to prove again. And I will say I cut down the recipe for this because the balls, the buns were meant to be twice as big, and yeah, twice as big and twice as many of them, and I just thought that was way too much. So I kind of feel like when I'm baking stuff, especially if I'm baking loads of stuff at once, it's nicer to just have like a little batch of really nice things that everyone eats, rather than a big batch of stuff that you get sick of. That's just my opinion though. My camera settings weren't quite right, so I think these look a little bit underdone, but I think they turned out pretty well. When I cut into them and everything, they were just how I kind of wanted them to be. Sometimes the colours just don't come through on my camera. The next step was making the chantilly cream, which is kind of like a sweet cream that's whipped, and you put that in the middle. And this was the reason I couldn't eat these, because it's just too heavy a dairy for me to handle. So I just decided to have a little bit of a taste, and that was it. I'm speaking to a very, very small part of my audience here, but to anyone that either lives in the Highlands or has been to the Highlands in Scotland, North Scotland, the cream in these tastes like the cream that you get in Harry Gow's Dream Rings. So that was something that I used to eat a lot of when I was little, and we used to go up and visit my gran. But then I found out that I'm probably lactose intolerant, so I stopped doing that to myself. But it does still taste quite nice, and did bring back a little flash of nostalgia. So I'm pretty happy with how the cream turned out, how the jam ended up turning out, and how the buns turned out. So it was all looking pretty nifty. And this was quite a satisfying process as well. It looks a bit untidy, but once I brought out the spatula and kind of leveled off the buns, they looked kind of good. And then the final step was turning them into little strawberry Stegosaurus buns. I'm pretty sure I've got the right dinosaur there. Stegosaurus is the one with like the kind of spiky back, is it not? I hope it is anyway. So added the little spikes to it, and then added some icing sugar over the top, and they look good. As I've said numerous times now, I couldn't eat these, so I decided to take them round to my parents, and they had them instead, and this was my dad's review after trying it.
Oh man, that is good.
Next up, bake number 3, I did a platted loaf which was flavoured with parsley, garlic and mozzarella. I don't know what I was doing with the chopping, this just kind of felt like the right way to do it. I don't know how to chop garlic. I actually have never chopped garlic or crushed garlic in my life. I actually thought that a clove of garlic was like the big thing, like the full bulb of garlic. I thought that was just one clove, but luckily I googled what is a clove of garlic before I started this, because things could have turned out very, very garlicky if I'd not checked that. So luckily I did, and luckily I now know what a clove of garlic is. This time round I learned my lesson from the pesto bread and didn't overfill this bread, this dough, with a whole load of mixture. I don't know what I'm doing when I'm kneading dough. That's probably very evident. I just kind of do what feels right, so I apologise to anyone that knows how to knead bread properly. I just kind of do what feels right to me. I only put 15 grams of mozzarella in this, and I think that was the right amount. I probably could have done a little bit more actually, but I didn't want to repeat the mistakes with the pesto bread. Once again, giving the dough a bit of a slap, just because it's kind of satisfying to do so. After that, covered it in cling film, covered it with a towel, and then I went with my mum to check on her friend's geese. Her friend's away on holiday, and she asked me if I wanted to come up and see the geese. So of course I did, and this is what they had to say about it all. So after seeing the geese, came back like an hour later and unwrapped the bread, which could have been very garlicky, but just luckily it was just a normal amount of garlic. And things were looking quite nice. I was happy with how this one felt. I just immediately knew with the cottage loaf that things were not going to go well when I was handling it, and just felt how wet the dough was. But this one just felt so much better. So as I said at the start, this was a platted loaf. So I chopped it up into 8 little balls and then rolled it out into these sausages. You can see that I've got a little ruler there as well, just to make sure that everything was kosher. The next step here is to make it into a kind of octopus, and things just immediately went horribly. It ended up kind of looking like Squidward, and I then just kind of gave up and just did what I kind of wanted to do with the plats, because the guide I was following just didn't seem to be doing it for me. So the loaf is kind of half and half. Half where I followed the guide and it just doesn't look good in my opinion, and then half where I just kind of went freestyle with it, and I think that part of it turned out better. So, you know, blow my own trumpet here, but I think the part where I just kind of freestyled turned out a little bit better. And here's a little time lapse of the bread turning into the kind of half plat, half monster. I think it turned out okay in the end actually. It's got a nice colour on it, it smelled really good, and it tasted really, really nice. Once again, this bake was finished at like 11 o'clock at night, and I didn't want to give myself nightmares by eating cheese too late, but it was too late by this point. I decided to do it anyway. Put some more mozzarella on top, put a bit of pepper on top, and then had that as my late night snack. I'm pretty sure I did have some nightmares after this, but it was worth it. I would give this a 9 out of 10 just because the plat didn't work out very well. But that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I'd appreciate you leaving a like and subscribing for more. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.